In the frozen wastes of deadlock, only the strong survive, and no one is stronger in the cold than Kelvin, the master of ice and frost. Whether you're looking to dominate teamfights, outmaneuver your enemies, or support your allies, Kelvin's unique abilities make him a formidable force. Let's break down each of his skills and learn how to turn the tide of battle with Kelvin. So for starters, I recently played Kelvin in the Aurora Deadlock tournament and won the tournament, and this is kind of like my guide on how to play Kelvin. This is more of a competitive aspect of Kelvin compared to a casual one. Firstly, I want to talk about Kelvin's strengths and weaknesses. So I'll start with strengths. Kelvin has really good mobility with his ice path, and it just provides a lot of mobility for ganking. Kelvin also has really good healing, probably the best healer in the game currently in terms of how much healing outputs every game. If you build him as a support, which you should be doing, you can also do gun Kelvin, but I feel like support Kelvin is just 10 times better. Kelvin is also really good when it comes to team fighting just because of his Arctic Beam. His Arctic Beam just allows you to take so much space, and he's just so good for team fights. I'm not even mentioning his Dome. Dome is also really oppressive in team fights. He's also really good for taking objectives and stalling objectives just because of his Ice Dome. Also, it's really good for engaging and disengaging fights. If you're getting ulted by an Infernus or something, you can just Dome and all the value is gone. Kelvin's also really oppressive in early game just because of his beam and his nades and all the damage he does in lane. Now for the weaknesses. Kelvin has quite low damage in mid to late game because if you're building support, you're just usually building for utility and not really for your damage. So he falls off in the late game / mid game when it comes to damage, but he makes up for it with his utility and slowing and everything else. And another weakness he has is that he relies on his teammates if you're building support. If you're doing gun, you do you, but if you're building support, which you should, like I've said, he relies on your teammates a lot, so it's quite hard to play Kelvin support in a solo queue environment. Let's start with Kelvin's abilities. The first ability is Frost Grenade. When it detonates, it releases a cloud of freezing ice, dealing 80 damage to enemies and slowing their movement by 40% for 4 seconds. Tier 1 gives you 1 extra charge. Upgrading it to Tier 2, which is the most crucial upgrade, it allows you to heal your allies and yourself for 145 HP. This also scales with Spirit. This is perfect for spamming in teamfights and providing crucial AoE heals and damage, and maxing it to tier 5 increases the damage it does by 175. Personally, this is something I get later in the game. A pro tip for using Frost Grenade: position yourself in the sweet spot when using it to hit your enemies and heal your allies and yourself. Another quick tip is to throw your Frost Grenade and then immediately use your Frost Beam to have a lot of burst damage. Next up we have Ice Path, Kelvin's mobility, positioning and ganking tool. Ice Path allows Kelvin to create a trail of ice that not only increases movement speed but also grants slow resistance. Now for the upgrades. Tier 1 gives you +4 movement speed, which is really good early, so you can start ganking quickly and becoming active on the map. Tier 2 reduces the cooldown by 15 seconds, so you can rotate and roam more frequently. And the final Tier 5 upgrade makes it so Kelvin gets more spirit the more ice paths he creates, and it's capped at 55 spirit. This is probably the final tier 5 upgrade you get as Kelvin, since the other ones are so much better in comparison. Quick little tip: use Ice Path to gain a high ground advantage, so you can use your rescue beam and stay away from the fight and beam with your ice beam, and this also ensures that you're safe and you won't really take as much damage, or use it to chase down targets while ice beaming them. Kelvin's third ability, Arctic Beam, brings overwhelming power to teamfights. Arctic Beam channels freezing energy into a long-range beam, dealing 60 DPS and building up to a massive 70% movement slow and a 40% fire rate slow, and this only gets stronger with items you buy later in the game. Now for the upgrades. Tier 1 lowers the cooldown by 7.5 seconds, allowing it to spam ice beam in lane and to create a lot of pressure. Now for the Tier 2, it increases the damage by 40. This upgrade makes it so you have a lot of kill pressure in lane if you're building into beam, which you should be doing, by the way. Now for the last upgrade, the tier 5, it makes it so the beam now hits 2 additional targets, and this applies the slow and the fire rate debuff to multiple targets, pretty much shutting down at least 3 people in teamfights. This beam also applies item debuffs you have, so it's really strong. Quick tip: if you didn't know, you can use Arctic Beam to deny souls / secure souls. This is great when laning, when trying to deny or secure souls. Another tip is to prioritize beaming enemies diving your backline to create space, or when engaging, try and hit the enemy in the middle so the beam spreads to the teammates around. TLDR, Arctic Beam is pretty much the strongest teamfighting ability in the game. Lastly, we have Kelvin's ultimate ability, Frozen Shelter. They recently changed his ability, so it now freezes towers towers or objectives, so it can't really be used to get a free mid boss, but there are different ways you can use it now. I will touch on those later. So what does Frozen Shelter do, aka Dome? It creates a massive dome that cannot be broken. It provides 120 health regen and slows enemies within by 35%. So now for the upgrades. Tier 1 gives enemies within a 40% fire rate slow, making the fights inside the dome heavily favor those inside. Well, more than it already is. Tier 2 reduces the cooldown by 38 seconds. This just allows you to use it more freely instead of saving it for crucial objectives like Urn, mid boss or for towers. Now for the tier 5. It increases the regen by 70 and it also now scales with spirit, basically making it impossible to die inside the dome in late game fights. Pro tip, time your dome activation during crucial moments in team fights like doming a lash ult or doming a engage of an enemy to completely shut down the push. You can also dome the towers to tower dive with your teammate, since the towers get frozen and they don't attack you. Next up I want to talk about the build paths for Kelvin. So first off I start with Arctic Beam. I level that up real quick so I can have my Arctic Beam in lane. Then I level my nade, because nades are really good, nade spam. Then you get your Frost Walk and after that you get your ult. So how should you allocate your points? I like putting 2 points into Arctic Beam early because it just increases the DPS you do on people that are overextending and it allows you to punish people really hard if they misplay. After that I might go 1 point into Ice Walk depending if I need to roam. If I don't need to roam a lot, I just wait until I get tier 5 upgrade on Ice Beam. After that you get 1 point into Ice Path depending if you didn't get it or you did get it. Then after that you get 2 points into your nades, so you can start healing with your nades, really crucial. After that you can kind of decide what you want to go, but I like doing Dome, so I get my cooldowns reduced on my Dome. Getting 2 points in the Dome basically allows me to waste Dome sometimes without really thinking about the cooldown. And then the tier 2 upgrade for Ice Path, I usually get it after the Dome upgrades. This upgrade kind of depends on how the game goes. If I don't roam a lot, I'm just gonna max my ult because my ult is really strong. Well, the tier 5 upgrade for them. Then after you get those points, you can either choose to upgrade your nades or your Ice Path. It kind of depends on what you like doing. Personally, I like maxing my nades first for the burst damage. That's kind of what I prefer doing on Kelvin. Some people might do nade first because they like healing with nades. It's kind of like personal preference, but I feel like building for Arctic Beam is the strongest in a competitive environment and for like really high MMR games, where you build Kelvin as like an annoying, supportive, slowing devil. Next up I want to talk about the items you should buy on a supportive Kelvin. First up I want to talk about lane items. The first item you should pick up in lane is High Velocity Mag. It basically increases the bullet velocity of Kelvin's bullets, so it's easier to last its souls. Also the gun just feels better. Next item you should pick up is Healing Rate, because it's gonna build into your health nova later on, and it's generally just a good item for lane in case you get poked or do something stupid. The next item I actually recommend getting is Mystic Reach. This is gonna make it so your beam just has a longer range, so you can just harass people even more in lane. Now for the more situational items in lane. You could go Restorative Shot if you're struggling really hard in lane, so you can just regen a bit. Another item I really like buying is Spirit Strike. You just punch them and you beam them and you do so much damage in lane. And then the last item I recommend you buy is actually Health Nova. If you're able to get Health Nova early, it just allows you to just have a free lane essentially. Next up I want to talk about the after lane items that I like to call it. These are the items you usually get straight after lane or like after laning phase has ended. The first item is Slowing Hex. So why is Slowing Hex so good on Kelvin? Essentially, once you pop Slowing Hex into your Arctic Beam, you basically make it so the enemies cannot move in the early game. Since Slowing Hex reduces their dash distance, and on top of that you slow them with the Arctic Beam, they legit cannot move. Also, they can't use any movement abilities on top of that. Also, getting Slowing Hex just increases your ganking potential by a lot. Next up is Sprint Boots. You just buy it whenever you have enough money or have extra money, since you are just gonna use it most of the time for movement speed and roaming around the map. Next item is Healing Booster. It's gonna increase the healing of everything you do on Kelvin, so your Dome is getting increased healing, your Health Nova is getting increased healing, and then your nades are getting increased healing. It's like super good on Kelvin. The next items we're gonna buy is Improved Cooldown and Duration Extender. Kinda explains itself. You need cooldown reduction and you need Duration Extender for your abilities. The last item I recommend you getting is Healbane. Since this decreases the enemy's healing by 40%, and once you have your tier 5 upgrade on your Arctic Beam, it is basically AoE healing reduction. Now I want to talk about the mid game. First item you should rush is Rescue Beam. Rescue Beam is just super strong on Kelvin. You can Ice Path and then rescue someone across the map. Like Kelvin is really good when it comes to supportive utility, so buying Rescue Beam is just a no-brainer. Next item we are gonna buy is Enduring Speed. It's gonna give us slow resistance and more movement speed, really good for Kelvin or any character in general. Then we are gonna get Suppressor. This is gonna boost our fire rate slow by a lot. Then we're gonna buy Superior Cooldown and imbue it with our Arctic Beam, so we're gonna have less cooldown on our Arctic Beam. Then we're gonna buy Improved Reach to basically increase the range of your beam even more, so it's gonna be easier for you to hit multiple targets with your Arctic Beam. Next up we're getting Mystic Slow to decrease the fire rate even more and slow for even more. And lastly we're getting Superior Duration, and we're also gonna imbue that with our Arctic Beam. Having these items in the mid game just makes you a powerhouse in team fights. No one can fight you and your team. You are literally just creating so much space for your team that the enemies literally cannot fight you. And if one of your teammates get caught, you just Rescue Beam them, and then you Health Nova, and then you nade on top of them, and they're full HP almost. Lastly, I want to talk about late game items for Kelvin. Around this time, it should be around 30 minutes, and you have all of your core items that you bought in mid game. A good pickup here would be something like Spirit Lifesteal to keep you healthy, since now your beam does a lot of damage and you heal a lot from it. Another good item pickup here is Mystic Vulnerability. It just increases the DP as you do. And if you want to be even more greedy, you can go escalating exposure and do even more damage. And throughout the game you buy armors depending on what enemy team comp they have. So if they have a lot of spirit damage, you buy spirit armor, and then if they have a lot of bullet, you buy bullet armor. Unstoppable is also a really good pickup for late game fights depending on what team comp you're playing against. Let's say you're against a Dynamo and you can use Unstoppable and then dome his black hole, and the black hole has 0 value. Lastly, I want to talk about miscellaneous items you can buy in Kelvin. A good item you can buy here is Debuff Reducer and Debuff Remover. Just depends on what they are running on the enemy team. Say they're running a pocket, you just buy Debuff Remover and remove his affliction. Metal Skin against Haze, Silence Glyph against Yamato players and pocket players. Then Knockdown if there's a Vindicta running through your game, or like if there's a ulting Bebop, you just buy Knockdown. Another good item for late game is Soul Rebirth. It just allows you to respawn, you get cooldown reduction. It's just really good in general on any character. Here we have the entire build I like running for Kelvin. If you search for Piggy in the search bar, you should find my build, and I usually update this build every patch. Lastly, I want to touch on your game plan throughout the game. In the early game, you want to look for denies and secures with your beam and roam to a lane when you have the possibility to roam. That means if your wave is pushed, you can literally just roam around the map, so you don't lose any farm. Once laning phase ends, you want to try and look for picks around the map with a teammate. Usually after you get slowing hex, since it increases your gank potential like crazy. Once mid game rolls around, you want to play around your teammate and hover if they're doing risky stuff like pushing a walker or taking enemy camps, so you can rescue beam them in case they get pushed by the enemy. Or dome them, or do whatever you need to do to save them. Here you're also looking to do urns while using Ice Path and save dome for objectives, like doming urn when teammates are delivering it, or doming mid boss when it's descending. There's also a new trick with Kelvin Dome since rejuve stops mid-air, but you can also do some other cool things with it now, like the clip rolling in the background. In late game you want to try and look for picks with a teammate and take space if the enemies are trying to engage on you. You create space by using your beam and sitting high up using your Ice Path. Here you might also consider sitting a bit far back so you can rescue beam your teammates if the enemy collapses on you. In general, Kelvin late game is like you need to be aware of your positioning like 24/7, because if you get picked off, your value is just gone pretty much. Down in the description I have some replay codes of my Kelvin games in high MMR versus good players in case you want to see how I play Kelvin at a high level. I'm also live every single day at twitch.tv/pkmk, so if you want to see me play Kelvin or other support characters, you know where to find me. That's pretty much everything you need to know about Kelvin and how to play the Iceman. Leave a like and a sub if you want more guides like this in the future. I might start working on an Ivy guide very soon, since it's my most played character with around 270 games played. Yeah, that's everything. Goodbye.